I got your name. I got your ass.
KFI, AM 640, Handel here. It's Tuesday, which means 8 o'clock, Tactical Tuesday with Bryan Suits. Bryan, a couple of huge stories we have to cover. We'll do the USS John S. McCain a little bit later on, but I think the far bigger story, certainly not to the families of the men who were killed, but certainly in terms of big picture geopolitically, is the issue of the Afghanistan speech last night, where the president made a 180-degree turn. We are staying out of Afghanistan. We don't want to do nation building. We are going to reduce the number of men, armed forces in the country, and all of a sudden now we're going to increase it. And all of us, and he says, you know what? I now understand what's going on, which is why I'm going the other way. So, Bryan, you want to analyze this a little bit for us?
Well, the thing that he said was, and it was about halfway through the speech, he said, no more to kill the enemy. And I think that's almost a direct quote.
Okay, would you do that again? Would you say that again? You cut out for a moment. No more?
He said, no more nation building. We are there to kill the enemy. And I think that's almost a verbatim quote. And that seems to be where McMaster and Kelly and Mattis have brought him, which is, look, you campaigned criticizing Obama, precipitously leaving Iraq, and now you want to do the same thing in Afghanistan. You can't do that. We have no negotiating position with the Taliban unless we're killing them. And so he does understand that. But by the way, behind the scenes, rumors are flying that we are negotiating secretly with the Taliban right now in Jordan, and that this is sort of a ploy to tell them, hey, look, this guy may have said we're getting out of Afghanistan, but look, even he says we're still there to fight you guys. So those negotiations, according to pretty well-placed rumors, are going on, and this might be just a negotiating ploy.
Now, in terms of negotiating with the Taliban, what are we looking at? The Taliban at this point controls, almost 50% of the entire country of Afghanistan. They've come back with a vengeance. And so is it a question of splitting the country up, where you're going to see Afghanistan and you're going to see Taliban land?
Well, they control everything that's not a big city, only because we just don't have enough people there. And they understand that. They will grant that they don't control Kabul, Kandahar, any of the big, urban areas, and that they're not going to control the country if they don't control those. And so we have a pretty good position with them. And so the idea of, we're not going to territory to then trying to do with.
Yeah, we are cutting in and out. So let me go on and just sort of expand on that. And you were saying that if we negotiate, it's the big cities are now controlled by the government. What is a possibility then of the government of Afghanistan giving up any of those big cities? And is Afghanistan part of it, or is it just us going to be talking to the Taliban? Yeah, we're going to have to try to dial him again. So a quick word about, before we go and try to get him back and talk about what happened with the USS McCain, because there's a lot of news there. And the horrible news that we thought was going to happen actually came out. So what the president did last night is turn around, pivoted completely, went 180 degrees the other way, and said, we are now going to bring troops into in-country. Let's go to the phone. Let's see if that works. Are you there, Bryan?
Yeah, this will work. This always works.
Okay, fair enough. So the question was, before we were rudely cut off by technology or lack thereof, is in terms of negotiating with the Taliban, which seems to be the only way out, otherwise we're in Afghanistan forever, number one, is the country of Afghanistan involved itself, and to what extent, the government of Afghanistan? And since you said the Taliban don't have the major cities and they need the major cities, where does it go? Does Afghanistan give up its major cities?
Me that Afghanistan goes back to Afghanistan, where it is just century. You leave the cities and you're in the 8th century, you're in the cities and you're in the 20th century. Not the 21st, but the 20th century. I mean, it'd be that we just throw our hands up and say, who cares?
So why are we even negotiating? Why don't we just let it happen and bail out the way actually Donald Trump initially said and just go, it's going to happen the way it's going to happen?
I don't want to leave behind a bloodbath. And if the Taliban came back the way they arrived in 1991, 92, 93, when Pakistan created them, then it would be a bloodbath. And this is why Pakistan is part of negotiations. They have to take ownership of what they've done by creating the Taliban, and they have to acknowledge that a democratic Afghanistan is not a threat to Pakistan. And that's why they created the Taliban, an undefended border.
All right.
To their north. Because
we got to take a break.
To defend the border.
Okay, we have to take a break and come back, and we're going to go to the USS McCain, that story. In the meantime, before or when we come back, I'll tell you how you can win a trip to our iHeartRadio Music Festival, and we'll do this right after the break. KFI AM 640. KFI AM 640, Bill Handel here, August 22. All right, here's your chance to win a trip to the iHeartRadio Music Festival, and that's coming up next month, and it's something that's going to be, and always is, tremendous. So here's how you do it. You text the word FLY to 200-200.
You'll get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info. Standard data and message rates apply. That's FLY to 200-200.
All right, more Tactical Tuesday with Bryan Suits. Bryan heard right here on KFI every Saturday night, 10 to midnight, and every Sunday night, 8 to 10. All right, the second story I want to cover, and this is one that's ongoing right now, and that's the collision with the USS John S. McCain. This is named after John McCain's dad, who was an admiral, and there's a whole story there when John McCain was a prisoner in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War, and the collision that occurred with a Singapore oil tanker just off of the Singapore coast, I think in the harbor. Second time out in 2 months, a collision between a U.S. naval ship and a civilian ship. What the hell is going on, Bryan?
Well, the coincidence is pretty remarkable, isn't it? That two DDGs, two destroyers from the same squadron, are in collisions at sea, within 45 days of each other. And they're both, by the way, part of the ballistic missile defense. So this is why people are saying, oh, that's just too weird of a coincidence. Well, you know what? It's a coincidence. Now, first of all, my disclaimer here is I was a enlisted Bradley fighting vehicle commander, M1A1 tank commander, field artillery officer, and cavalry officer. I know absolutely screw all about ships. But a good friend of mine who is now in media, a former naval officer, surface warfare guy, he said, you know what? They just stopped literally, he said they just stopped teaching the rules of the road after 9/11. He said they dropped that part of OCS for surface warfare officers. And he said it's just not emphasized the way it is. And he said this is what happens 15 years later when those guys are commanding ships. He said the culture starts from the skipper down. And if the skipper is not on that bridge 23 hours a day with binoculars, then the crew feels like, well, I don't have to. We can rely on the technology. The GPS is going to get us through. This was not 1 a.m. The sun was coming up. This was a case of eyeballs and just simple good navigation. And my brother-in-law is a merchant marine officer, and he spent a year up at the academy up at Vallejo in the Bay Area. A year of it was navigation and rules of the road. I mean, in other words, merchant marine officers are a third-class merchant marine ticket has far more navigational training and experience before he leaves the academy.
Okay.
The Navy does. And the Navy doesn't want to talk about that, and I don't want to, air the dirty laundry, but this is what I'm hearing from naval officers, so don't email me and say that I'm a tank driver. What do I know? This is what I'm hearing from naval officers.
Now, I'll buy that it's a coincidence, but The important part is that is it going to be situational awareness and just pure negligence on the part of the officers? Is it going to be, in this case, for example, I heard that it was a steering failure, in which case the officer as a captain probably will not be held responsible, I'm assuming. Which way does it look like it's going at this point?
It looks like the crew should have seen that they were crossing, but they were going to fail to clear this tanker by crossing in front of the bow, and that an alert should have been called. There should not have been people below decks asleep. Bottom line, if there's a collision imminent, and we're not talking about F-15s here. We're talking about 10 knots versus 20 knots, and so it looks like it's going to be just like the Fitzgerald, human error. And if people miss that report over the weekend, the CO lost his job, the executive officer lost his job, the senior enlisted guy, the chief of the boat, he lost his job. The Navy squarely put the Fitzgerald on the command culture, and and if you know anything about how military hierarchy works, it seems really unlikely in that destroyer squadron that one ship would be an outlier. It seems like there's a culture possibly in that squadron, because now you've got a second ship from that squadron in very, very similar circumstances with a similar outcome.
All right, Brian, thank you.
Alrighty.
All right, we finally got a good line. All right, coming up, it's Handel on the News, late edition.
Handel on the News. Handel on the News. Bill Handel.
KFI AM 640, Bill Handel here. On a Tuesday morning, it is time for Handel on the News, late edition. Jennifer Jones Lee, Mo Kelly in this week, and me, and here is our lead story. We have an Amber Alert this morning for a 9-year-old boy, Daniel Marasoff. And police responded to a fatal shooting in Santa Maria. There was the victim, dead, obviously, and there was Daniel Marasoff missing. And we don't know the connection yet between Marasoff and the woman who was killed. We do know that Marasoff was taken by Konstantin Marasoff. We don't know if there's a connection. I have to assume there is. But the Amber Alert, let me tell you about the car. This is the important one as you see it driving around. If you do, it's a 2015 blue Volkswagen Golf hatchback with California plate 7JGG242. That's 7JGG242, a 2015 blue Volkswagen Golf hatchback. I'm assuming there aren't too many of those out there.
Well, it's fairly new.
Yeah, I didn't even know they were still making Golfs, actually.
I didn't either. But the little boy he's 9, he's 4 or 5, he's white, he weighs about 90 pounds, he's got brown hair and brown eyes.
And since at this point, Konstantin Marasoff is considered armed and dangerous, do not approach. Just call 911.
And again, police are asking for special attention to be paid to international airports and border crossings. So they obviously think that this guy's trying to get the little boy out of the country.
All right, here is a story about U.S. penalties on Chinese Russian firms over North Korea. And the Trump administration is imposing sanctions on 16 companies or people who are connected with North Korea, assisting the nuclear ballistic missile program, helping North Korea to make money to support those programs. Now, here's my question, and that is the Treasury Department says the penalties are intended to further isolate North Korea. How is it possible that they weren't sanctioned and their assets weren't seized before? Why isn't that anybody having anything to do with North Korea, company, individual, we're going to seize all of their assets?
Because it's China.
But, and I understand that's China, but we're not talking about the country now. We're talking about Chinese companies. Now, whether they're owned by the government, because a ton of businesses are owned by the government, particularly the military. the military owns a huge number of companies, and I understand the political fallout, but still,